Financial support for the production of Issues in Education is provided by the Florida State University License Plate. Your FSU license plate supports scholarships for students who enrich and contribute to our communities. Special programs, gift certificates, and rebates for first-time buyers online at fsu.edu/mytag.
Coming up today on Issues in Education, the 2013 legislative session is over. We talk about the decisions made for FSU and what it means to the university's future. Welcome to Issues in Education. I'm Suzanne Smith, alongside my co-host, Florida State University President, Dr. Eric Barron. Now that the 2013 legislative session is complete and the governor has made his final veto decisions, Florida State University is looking at the end results and what they mean for the university. To help provide us with a wrap-up of this session, we're joined by FSU's Assistant Vice President for Governmental Relations, Kathleen Daly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So my bet is a lot of people would be surprised on what you do in terms of legislative relations. Maybe you could tell us, using this last session as an example.
Well, I meet with legislators and staff on a regular basis every single day. I run around the Capitol all day long. My office tracks we tracked 1,900 bills this session, as an example.
Now, all of those have to do with education, higher education in Florida State?
Well, no, I'm sorry. There were 1,900 bills filed. We tracked about 438 of them. That's a lot of bills. Of those, about 55 passed. So we do a lot of work out of my office.
Let's talk about the goals that you were hoping for and the university was hoping for this year. What were the main things you were wanting the legislature to do for the university and higher education?
We started off with 3 priorities, and it ended up being about 4 by the end of the session, that the administration identified. And those included funding for the university, the Preeminence legislation, and PECO, Public Education Capital Outlay, either a supplement for that fund or a replacement for that fund.
So let's take these one at a time and first talk about funding. What was the challenge? What were we trying to make up for last year?
Last year, right at the very end of the session, the legislature took a $300 million non-recurring cut to the state university system. That was a $65 million loss for us at FSU. So one of our main priorities this year was to get that funding back in the queue, to pick that back up again for this year and start with it. That did happen, actually, but that was questionable throughout the session.
So this is a common misconception out there, because the legislator wanted this cash, and so we didn't write a check for $65 million. They basically decreased our appropriation $65 million. And so then the whole key to this was trying to get the appropriation back to the level it was before.
Correct. Right. So last year we lost the 65 out of our base. It's gone. It's gone for good. But our goal this year was to make sure that that did not become a permanent cut.
And so everybody's been calling it, the money's been restored, but it's not like you get that $65 million back in addition to
Correct.
that money. So this is completely different.
Every time anybody hears the word restore, they say, well, Dr. Barron, what are you going to spend that $65 million on? And there's no $65 million. It's just back to where we were before.
Well, let's also explain the difference between recurring and non-recurring money before we get into all the details on that. So what's the difference between those?
Well, non-recurring is a one-time slug of money that the legislature gives to us. It's good for the entire fiscal year, but at the end of the fiscal year, at the beginning of the next, it goes away unless the legislature decides to re-up it again. Recurring is added to our base, and it ups the bar on our base, and that's where then we start. And it stays there each year unless the legislature goes in and specifically cuts it, which they could always do.
So, for example, you wouldn't want to hire permanent staff on one-time money. You're certainly not going to add faculty on one-time money. You need to have that be recurring so you have the confidence that you can pay those salaries for that faculty member year in and year out.
I'm going to jump ahead to the PECO money. One thing people don't understand also is that the money that is used for the university is separate from the money that's used for buildings and facilities, and that's what PECO is. Is that the correct sort of interpretation of that?
Yes, public education capital outlay was fed by a trust fund that on gross receipts tax proceeds from landlines and from utilities gross receipts. Both of those things have decreased lately. Most people are getting rid of their landlines, and their energy saving appliances are cutting into that gross receipts.
So there's less money for everybody for the
Correct.
PECO
Correct.
and the building maintenance and things like that.
Correct, and we don't think that it's going to come back to the level that it was.
But there has to be some source of funding for maintenance and for buildings, or you'll create long-term problems for the university. Imagine how you have to advance a science lab to be at the cutting edge, or an engineering lab to be at the cutting edge. So if you freeze your buildings in 1970, you can imagine that's not going to match up with the needs of 2013.
Another funding issue that happened this this session, the legislature decided to give a 3% tuition increase to the university, but the governor vetoed that in the final budget. Is that going to have any effect on what the plans were for the university?
Well, you know, first of all, we didn't really count on the tuition money because we know the governor has taken a strong and consistent stand against tuition. In many ways, it'd be wonderful, though, that if we went back the last 4 or 5 years, if the legislature was always the one that increased it, because people talk about runaway tuition and the fact that the universities have increased tuition. That's a different tuition category called differential tuition, and that's what the university has done to try to counter the more than 25% cuts in our academic budgets. But not everybody pays differential tuition. If the legislature increases tuition, everybody pays it. So it makes it a much more even distribution for the students. And basically, a third increase by the legislature, an increase by the legislature, to get the equivalent dollar amount, you have to do 3 times that much in differential tuition. I know that probably sounds very complicated, but if you're going to raise tuition, we should have the legislature do it. It was an interesting discussion because I think the legislature wanted universities to have more resources. And unless you're part of Preeminence, no university is getting any increase in what their base budget is. So the legislature did this through tuition. The governor vetoed it. Frankly, we weren't counting on it because the governor's been consistent.
Are you hoping that maybe next year everybody will take a look at it again and raise that?
Okay, so the very best thing is to have an appropriated amount. If you have an appropriated amount, you don't need to increase tuition. And then you can continue to have Florida universities to be incredibly accessible. Many people talk about our tuition and fees being ranked on average for Florida being 41st among all states. But that's for average universities, and we're not an average university. If you take the research universities of the country, the Florida research universities are dead last in tuition and fees. This is a really good thing for accessibility if you have an appropriation that allows you to function as a major university. So I think every president out there would prefer not to have a tuition increase.
Right.
But to not have a tuition increase, you need to, if you're going to stay competitive, you've got to have revenues from some other source like tuition.
Well, when we get to the bottom line of this session and what's happening with the budget for Florida State, how much of an increase have we got funding-wise over last year?
Well, I think we're going to end up probably with the vetoes and all somewhere around 8%, which is still very high.
We had a great year.
A very good year.
Oh.
Very good year.
Well, let's talk about the priority number 2, the Preeminence bill, which also has brought money in. Along the way, there were a few versions of that. What was the final outcome on how that's going to work?
The legislature put into law 12 metrics, 12 standards that must be met to be named preeminent. 11 of 12 must be met. And 2 universities within the system meet those goals right now, and that would be Florida State University and the University of Florida. And they had, I think, 14 last year. They dropped 2.
And this has actually been a rather long history. This university put together a document basically 3 years ago, which was called Florida Can Do Better Than Texas. Let's create performance metrics, and any university that meets those performance metrics is rewarded by flexibility. Okay? So if I do really well, let me do even better. Take some of the shackles off. So that was step 1, no legislation that went along with it, but we spent a lot of time doing hearings on metrics. So year 2, last year, a preeminence bill with 14 metrics appeared. If you hit 12 of those 14, then you could raise tuition at a higher rate. So that bill passed the House and the Senate, but was vetoed by the governor. Again, the consistent message on tuition, because he did not want tuition to increase, even though, regardless of performance, all the universities in the state basically charged the identical amount. So this is version 3, right, which the metrics were edited slightly, but the key here is it came with an appropriation, not a tuition increase. And as we just said, we'll take an appropriation over a tuition increase any day.
Well, how much money is that going to be coming to the university through this bill?
The legislature appropriated $15 million this year, but built into the law kind of a 5-year plan, which was based on the top 25 proposal that President Barron put forward. So presumably, if all goes well, we'll get $15 million recurring in our base for the next 5 years from the legislature.
Okay, so what will this money be used for?
Okay, so this has the potential to have an absolutely extraordinary impact on Florida State. A lot of it is designed to have us move up in the rankings. We know that the salaries of the students are correlated with the ranking of the universities. We know that the ranking is a major factor in a student choosing a university. So if Florida has higher ranked universities, you're more likely to keep the best and brightest in the state. We don't want to just do rankings, we also want our students to get good jobs. And so there's a career enhancement focus on that as well. So now if you broke it all down and you were going to impact both your rankings and job potential for the students and also make it less expensive for them to go to school, that means an investment in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It means focusing on National Academy membership. These are the all-stars that bring in a lot of external money into the state. It means having scholarships for STEM-ready students, read students that are doing well in math and quantitative areas. It's an opportunity to add entrepreneurs in residences for different colleges. This is part of our entrepreneurial university idea. An enhancement in career readiness, actually including this in the curriculum. And then finally, continued greater emphasis on retention and graduation. Number one way to save a taxpayer $1, number one way to save a family $1 is come to school, stay in school, graduate in a timely fashion. You want to waste taxpayer money? Have a student that isn't retained, and you spent all that money and didn't get an output. So the $15 million is divided literally into those categories, and every year we hope we'll continue to invest in those categories. If you look at our ranking, almost all of the academic performance measures in the rankings were already a top 30 university, despite the fact that we're ranked 42. If you look at the measures that have something to do with resources, like number of faculty per student, for the number of students you have, how many students you have in a classroom, the amount we pay our faculty, those are all areas where we're not even in the top 50. And so we know this money is going to have a huge impact.
Well, let's talk about the third thing on the list, the PECO funds. What was the end result in that?
Well, you know, as I said earlier, our goal, our priority this session was to either find some supplemental funding or find a replacement for the fund. Neither one actually ended up happening. There was a bill in the House that took all of the recommendations from a BOG task force on the issue from last fall and put it into a bill, and we were very excited, and the House passed it. But there was not a Senate version, and as much as we lobbied the Senate to pick that up, they never did. So we are going to look for some resolution again next year, but we kind of came out, Florida State kind of came out of this session feeling a little bit okay, because we had the $5 million in critical maintenance, and we're going to get 6.7 from a larger SUS pot. But the governor then ended up vetoing the $5 million in critical maintenance.
So what happens now with the critical maintenance? I mean, the word critical in there means it's important.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen?
Well, we will use the $6 million we have out of the other fund and take our highest priority areas. But you know, I think that the difficult part is, how do you keep at the forefront of the STEM fields in a state for which STEM is a priority? How do we do that if we don't have the opportunity to have state-of-the-art facilities? This is a big challenge. There's a small door open, though, in public-private partnerships, yes?
Yes, there was a bill that did pass that might allow us a little bit of public-private partnership opportunity. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at that and see, and hopefully next year we can expand on it.
The Civic Center, I think, was the fourth thing.
It's kind of our fourth. Yeah.
Fourth thing. How did that come about? And it wasn't in the original 3, but it developed into that.
Well, it's a huge issue for us. It was a local bill that passed.
What's a local bill?
A local bill. It's a bill that pertains to a specific local area rather than statewide.
And you need a local sponsor.
Do need a local sponsor. We had Alan Williams from Tallahassee and Senator Bill Montfort in the Senate who sponsored the bill for us. And local bills are treated a little bit differently. There's a little bit of a different process, but ultimately it has to pass the legislature. It has to be signed by the governor.
So what happened?
So it passed, and it's waiting to be signed by the governor.
What does it mean?
Well, it means that we officially and legally now have the authority to run and operate the Civic Center.
So physically we own the Civic Center, but the legislation that created the whole operation to begin with has a board that oversees it. So that board still is overseeing it until the local bill passes on the Civic Center. So the property belongs to Florida State, the Civic Center belongs to Florida State. There are employees, but the governing board is not a Florida State governing board yet until this local bill passes.
Okay, and then that will happen July 1st?
So then effective, if the governor signs it, and I don't see any reason why he wouldn't want to sign such a bill, on July 1, that board is dissolved and it becomes part of the regular Florida State operations.
For the rest of the university system, how did it fare overall compared to what they had asked for? Just a general overall.
I think that ultimately the system did very well. Prior to the tuition veto, the system overall realized about an 8.3% increase, about $314 million to the system budget. I think that's going to come down just a little tiny bit because of the veto, but still a very good year.
A lot of it is one-time projects.
Yes.
I think the advantage of a preeminence bill is that 2 universities got increases in recurring dollars as part of their permanent budget that didn't have a very tight specific earmark in terms of its purpose.
One of the things you had talked about at the beginning was all the different bills you had to track, and one of the things that the university started a few years ago was Advocate for Florida State to get more alumni into helping with the process. How helpful have the alumni been to getting these bills passed this year and for it being such a successful session?
They were extremely helpful this session. We finally got them going, and I think that we want to keep them going, but that's part also of what I do through my office is advocacy, and we do it through Advocate for Florida State.fsu.edu, and we would like for people to go in and register. But we also do FSU Day at the Capitol. I do a newsletter once a week during the session. We have a Seminole caucus made up of legislators who hold degrees from Florida State University. We meet officially. We have a chairman and a vice chairman. Representative Petronas is our chair, and Senator Chris Smith is our vice chair, and they are very helpful to us as well. So,
but you know, it's an incredibly organized session in a lot of ways, because there are many times that, you know, in the last 3 years that one group is here and one group is here, and we pretty much had the same message throughout. There was also one other exciting thing that popped into our budget.
What's that?
And that is for our veterans. Could you explain what happened there?
Yes, it's a $500,000 recurring amount of money for our Veterans Center that can be used for operations, and I think that it's very exciting. I think we'll get a lot of use out of that. I think we're going to maybe hire some folks, and it puts us on the path to becoming one of the most veteran-friendly campuses in the country.
Now, will that be limited like the Preeminence bill on like 5 years, or is that just until?
No, it's recurring, and you know, this is something we've taken on as an idea, and I don't know whether I've ever said this before, but at the national meeting, the Student Veterans Association of America, when we announced that 87.5% of our vets either graduated or came back, we got a standing ovation. It's so far above the rest of the country. That Veterans Center and the staff have been supported out of my office on non-recurring dollars. Now there's recurring dollars, so we know the way it is that we're working to make sure our vets graduate at a higher rate, at the same rate or higher than our other students. This is a problem that has now been solved by the legislature. We know those folks will be there to help our vets from now on out.
Thank you very much. We've been talking with Kathleen Daly, Assistant Vice President for FSU's Governmental Relations. When we come back, Dr. Barron and I will talk one-on-one about more issues in education.
A spirit roams these parts. A spirit of respect, competition, and academic greatness. Some call our spirit myth. Others call it legend. We call it Florida State University.
Welcome back to Issues in Education. I'm Suzanne Smith, talking with Dr. Eric Barron, President of Florida State University. Dr. Barron, we've been talking about how FSU fared in the most recent legislative session. Bottom line, are you happy with the results?
You know, I think it was a great year. I think we owe a real debt to the legislature and the governor. The Preeminence bill is going to be transformative, especially if it keeps going for 5 years as it's intended. This is the first opportunity to be truly innovative. Before, we've been cutting for multiple years, and if we got a tuition increase, we were plugging holes or helping with financial aid. This is the first truly dollar that can be placed where you think the future's going.
The plan with the Preeminence bill is go for 5 years. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to take, you'll be able to get into the top 25 within that 5 years? You
know, I think so, and the reason is one that I said a little bit earlier. If you look at a lot of the metrics on academic performance, we're very close. It is really a lot of those things that are related to resources and the cuts that is holding us back. So I'll just give you an example. We have slowly made class sizes bigger and bigger. So we're sitting in this category where the typical class is 25 to 50. If we had, you know, a small percentage more that were less than 20, that number would go up in the rankings. There's some things we do incredibly well, like how well we graduate people compared to what is predicted. For that, we're 6th among the great public universities in this country. So clearly we have a path forward on how to do this, and I think we'll be successful if we get this consistent investment.
One of the things also that you've talked about is the Entrepreneurs in Residence program at the colleges. How is that going to work, and is it going to apply to all the colleges or some of them?
Yes, any college that wants to do this, but the idea is we're opening the doors of the College of Business to any major, because we think any major could be advantaged by a set of courses in business. Now imagine if some of those courses were taught within your college using your field as an example and taught by someone who is an entrepreneur, went into business, but they're an engineer. They knew exactly what it would take to take a product to the marketplace. That's the type of person we'd also like to have in the College of Engineering to teach some of those classes, but they're also rubbing elbows with those students and the faculty, thinking about those ideas and helping them be successful.
When will people start seeing the results of the legislative session in the day-to-day life of the university?
Okay, I think it'll start to make an impact very soon, because we'll start to outline hiring. As an example, we have a short amount of time where everybody's going to see a raise. $1,400 if you make less than $40,000 a year, $1,000 if you make more than $40,000 a year. So that's already a tangible benefit of what the legislature and the governor have done. It's been a while since there was a state-funded raise, but I think also just in terms of the attitude of being able to invest in the future and being able to look at a student that's great and say, don't leave this state and go to Georgia Tech. You want to come here. I think we'll start to see those things very quickly.
Okay, so now that the legislative session is over, what do you hope to or plan to focus on now that you've got some free time back?
Okay, well, you know, one of the things that, you know, I think I'm actually a little bit proud of it is when I came in the door, I said the recession's not going to last forever. And if we don't have our ideas ready to launch now, when the train starts to leave, we won't be on it. We'll be sitting there, wait, what idea do we have to get onto that train? And so we set about doing a group of big ideas so that we were ready. So Entrepreneurs in Residence is an example, Entrepreneurial University. So the ideas are there. We're getting on the train. And so we're sitting there focusing on philanthropy, but also legislatively and literally, we're ready to get on the train.
All right. Thank you very much, President Barron. That's our time for now. Please join us again next month for more Issues in Education. You can watch the premiere episode of Issues in Education the first Friday of every month at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That means you can see the next new episode of Issues of Education on Friday, July 5th on WFSU-TV. We hope you'll join us as we discuss the latest developments in higher education happening around the state and across the country. If you have questions that you would like us to address on this program, you can email us at issues@wfsu.org. Again, that's issues@wfsu.org. If you would like to see past episodes from Issues in Education, head to the President's website at president.fsu.edu. I'm Suzanne Smith with the Florida State University President, Dr. Eric Barron, for Issues in Education. We'll see you next time.
Financial support for the production of Issues in Education is provided by the Florida State University License Plate. Your FSU license plate supports scholarships for students who enrich and contribute to our communities. Special programs, gift certificates, and rebates for first-time buyers online at fsu.edu/mytag.